Much, Cindy and Lindsay, for this opportunity. And I'm a little nervous, but I'm speaking about my passion, so that kind of calms my nerves. And if you hear dogs barking, my house alarm is very sensitive. So that's just people walking outside, not my little, audience corner there. So tonight, I'd like to discuss policing, the history of policing, policing reform on a smaller angle, and why the talk became necessary. And Lindsay asked me to put together a few slides, and I do feel like a picture is worth 1,000 words. I have a few slides that some of them are just wordless, that can speak for themselves, and just want to create a little context around policing, because I think that culturally we may all have different ideas of what policing looks like based on our upbringing, based on our individual experiences, and yes, right down to our very skin color. So I'd like to start with that. And then I want to just speak candidly with you from a position of authority, and I'm the authority because I'm talking about me. So I can only talk about my experiences with the highest degree of expertise because it's my story. Kevin Hart says that if you tell jokes about your own life, nobody can steal them. It's your story. So this is going to be, my story. Okay, so here's the talk. The talk is the conversation that myself, my ex-husband had with our two sons. And it is basically structured around what to do when you get pulled over. I mean, I almost had a coronary when my oldest son wanted to get his license. I was so nervous about him getting pulled over. And it's what we have to talk about to make sure that they basically come home to us. And it's not about what one might think when you have an interaction with a police officer. Why did you pull me over? These are my rights. I'd like your badge number if I feel I'm being treated unfairly. You don't have consent to search my car. Not those things. It's not an assertion of one's constitutional rights. It's, I need you to come home alive. So we'll talk about things like, have your insurance papers in order. And now the iPhone has an app, a part of Siri that says, hey Siri, I'm being pulled over. And what Siri does is it raises up the lights on the phone and secretly records so that a police officer doesn't know that they're being recorded. Be polite to the officers. Keep your hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. If the officer seems aggressive, don't ask why you're being pulled over. Announce that you're reaching for your information in the glove compartment or the visor. I'm going to take my hands off the steering wheel now, and I'm going to reach on the visor for my insurance information, for my license. I'm going to reach into my glove compartment now and reach for my information. I don't have any weapons. Don't ask for a badge number, just memorize it. Don't resist, and finally come home alive. And of course, there's a lot more that arises out of that conversation, but this is just for driving. There's also a separate talk for walking because, my oldest son has been pulled over for walking while Black. And it's pretty much the same thing. Don't resist. I'm putting my hands in my pocket to show you ID if you're asking for it. What business do you have in this neighborhood? Just answer his questions. Don't be combative. Don't talk back, which I hate to even say out loud. But in the grand scheme of things, do I want you to be brave, prove that you're brave, or do I want you to come home alive? I want you to come home alive. Now, I don't know if you can see this graphic, but I thought this was interesting. And I'm going to send this to Lindsay so that she can distribute this with you all, but it just shows kind of the evolution graphically of the American police officer. Here's a little background. And I'm not going to go over this too much because I don't want to waste valuable dialogue time or experience time with going over every fact and reading bullet points, item by item. But policing was essentially started, and I put this out of order, so bear with me, I'm so sorry. But policing was basically started and what was referred to as slave patrols, that law enforcement would be out in the South, making sure that there were no slaves escaping. And if they were, to return them to their owners and to give them lashes that didn't exceed 30. And then that evolved into, once slaves were freed, to make sure that they're where they're supposed to be in the Reconstruction era. And then starting with the 50s, it was kind of the first line of defense for the elite that wanted to be protected against rising social movements, like the Civil Rights Movement, for example. SWAT was formed in 1965, and then as things evolved throughout policing, we find ourselves with looking at terms like school to prison pipeline and mass incarceration, where disparate populations of Black and brown people are in jail compared to the percentages they represent in the human race. So just some stats for us, basically, and if you poll any Black or brown person that's willing to have a candid conversation with you, they will tell you that we feel like we are living in two Americas. We are pulled over twice as often as white drivers. We're 4 times as likely to be searched, but we're less likely to be issued a ticket. So what are the stops really about? And white drivers are more likely to be found with contraband than Blacks or Hispanics, which is very unsettling. And I have some duplication here because, yeah. So here's just some word listings. This is the Black Panther Party, and this is in Philadelphia in the 1970s when I was in grade school. And you can see that they are humiliatingly unclothed. I don't think this was some kind of naked path. I think they had clothes on and they were unclothed up against the wall and being arrested. And this is high school student in the South in Birmingham being attacked by dogs less than 60 years ago. Yeah. And just taking a look at nonviolent protests, sit-in, Black Lives Matter movement, nonviolent protests, you see. And then of course, a month ago, Capitol protests. I wanted to play this for you, just a quick snippet, and I'm hoping that this will work. Just bear with me. I practiced this.
And I told you.
Okay.
So now I'm done, yeah.
Okay. You mind putting out
Sorry.
your cigarette, please, if you don't mind?
Do you mind putting out your cigarette? Yeah.
I'm in my car, but I have to put out my cigarette.
Well, you can step on out now.
I don't have to step out of my car.
Step out of the car.
Why am I...
Step out of the car.
No, you don't have the right.
Step out of the car.
You do not have the right to do that.
I do have the right. Now step out or I will remove you.
I refuse to talk to you other than to identify myself.
Step out or I will remove you.
I am getting removed for a failure.
Step out or I will remove you. I'm giving you a lawful order. Get out of the car now, or I'm going to remove you.
And I'm calling my lawyer.
I'm going to yank you out of here.
Okay, you're going to yank me out of my car?
Get out.
Okay, all right.
25.
Let's do this.
Yeah, we're going to.
Yeah, don't touch me.
Get out of the car.
Don't touch me. I'm not under arrest. You don't have the right to take
You
me out
are
of my
under
car.
arrest.
I'm under arrest for what?
25.
For what?
7 County FM 1098. Just
For
north
what?
of 290. Send me another unit. Get out of the car.
Another unit, FM 1098.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because the rest is just escalates, and he basically helps her out of the car, and then takes her to the station. And then 3 days later, she died. They ruled it a suicide, but she died in police custody. Sandra Bland, I speak her name. These are the names of people that were killed by the police, and I'll say that allegedly for those who pending cases. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And so you'll see from the slides that what I was going to show you in that video that I botched is Karen Turner was a former employee of the Port Authority, and she came, I guess her daughter called her to say that she was being pulled over, and she was very aggressive in the face of the police and telling them, do not address me as miss, you will address me as commissioner, I want to know what's going on. And she proceeded to use profanity and be right in the police officer's personal space, and nothing happened. So these are things that if you have a candid conversation with a Black or brown person, it's kind of like the 0 degrees of separation. Or 1 degree of separation. You either have experienced this or you know someone who has experienced this, and probably not that distant from you, relative, or friend. So I can talk to you about my own personal experiences with the police. And I will say that my first lesson was Officer Christmas. I was a little girl, and he was our neighborhood police officer. He was a black cop, and I don't know whether Christmas was his real name or it's just his white hair, but he was a friend to the community, and we knew him well. And in that time, in the early 70s, there were beat cops, and they walked the street and they knew the community. But that did not negate that earlier picture that I showed you of the Black men up against the wall with just their boxers on. There were incidences like that all over the city of Philadelphia, and it was talked about in hushed tones in our home, in the homes of our neighbors and our friends, where the police under a certain administration were just routinely taking Black men and sometimes Black women down to the waterfront and beating them indiscriminately. So on the one hand, my parents did teach me to respect authority, to respect the police, and we had Officer Christmas, and we didn't have the internet. So these things were talked about in hushed tones, and there was no social media, and it wasn't being reported about in the news. So that was my first lesson. My second lesson was as I started to get a little bit older and in school and doing book reports and having conversations at the kitchen table about Martin Luther King and nonviolent protests, then I read about the sit-ins and the fire hoses being unleashed on Black people that were nonviolently protesting, and the dogs that were being sicked on nonviolent protesters. And then my third lesson was a reshifting back because I became a mother, and I learned about Amadou Diallo, who was shot 41 times by the police in New York, and he was reaching for his wallet. And then I thought about several instances where white people are taken into custody by police and being accused of very heinous crimes, and somehow, miraculously, they are able to be taken into custody without incident or accident or violence. For example, Dylan Roof, he was accused and then subsequently convicted of shooting 9 people in a church in Charleston, South Carolina, one of which was related to a childhood neighbor. Then there's Kyle Rittenhouse, who was accused of killing 2 protesters in Antioch, Illinois. No injury. Kathleen Castillo sped through Black Lives Matter protests with 6 people being hospitalized, allegedly, no violent arrests. Brad Parscale assaulted his wife, allegedly, brandished a gun, threatened suicide, had 10 guns in his home, and no violence. Dalton Potter, Nicholas Schuck, I could go on, but 2 very poignant examples, and they were in that list that I just showed you. Tamir Rice was 12 years old, and I forget the city right now because sometimes my mind just compartmentalizes trauma. But he was a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy pistol. Someone called the police. The police arrived on the scene, and he was shot and killed within less than 60 seconds of the police arriving on the scene. 12 years old. And then Walter Wallace, most recently in Philadelphia, was 27 years old. His family called the police under the pretenses of helping because he was having a mental health episode. He had a knife and they killed him. So these are just, I could go on and on, but to talk about my personal story, I am the mother of 2 Black sons. And one of my Black sons was killed, not related to a police incident, 11 and a half years ago on June 28, 2009. So I have when Cindy says I've been through a lot, that constitutes a lot. And I have chosen, or maybe it chose me, to convert my experiences into activism so that I can hold the hands of moms, because unfortunately, my son or whoever has been killed today won't be the last homicide victim. So I've dedicated my life to helping moms and dads, that they'll hear me, get through that trauma. But I also have a beautiful surviving 21-year-old son who is delightful and knows all about the talk. But I have, my oldest son has been pulled over while driving my car. My ex-husband worked for the police department, and when it came up on the registry, the police registry, that it was a police address, they continued to berate him. My car had been searched more times than, I cleaned my house in the past, in this year, and I clean a lot. He has been stopped while walking. He was misidentified as a robbery suspect by a white woman who just said, "Oh, I think that's him," and then later recanted. And police came to my door and wanted to search my home, and I refused. So all kinds of things like that. And this is just my everyday experience of living with policing in America. And I don't see that this is changing anytime soon, because the policing is the problem. Policing is doing now what it was intended to do in slave patrols, and that is to keep people of color in line, and without question, without the equating of, my life looks like a white life. You want to peacefully protest, as is your right under the Constitution, and so do I. But if I'm aggressive, then I may not go home, and you will. So it's definitely a problem that I don't see going away without national reform and without micro conversations. And I don't want to jump ahead, Lindsay, so we can talk about action items out of our dialogue. And I feel like I've, taken up a lot of time with just this monologue. So I want to open it up, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts and want to get the juices of dialogue flowing. So thank you for letting me present.
Thank you.